All right. Hi, folks. Welcome to Live with Astronomer. This is our series of weekly live streams where we cover cool things that you can do with Airflow focused on developers. So we like to dive right into the code and show you how to do these things. As you probably gathered from my screen today, I'm going to talk about how to use DuckDB with Airflow. So MotherDuck, the parent company of DuckDB, just released their cloud service last week, which is super exciting. And as such, we're highlighting how you can use this with Airflow. This is a super common use case. DuckDB is super easy to set up and get started with. And as you probably know, if you've worked with Airflow, working with databases is kind of the bread and butter, something that most folks will start off with. Again, as you can probably gather from the title of this blog post, which I'll throw a link to this in the chat on YouTube afterwards, so you can read the whole thing. But we like to highlight 3 different ways you can use Airflow with both MotherDuck and DuckDB. I'm only going to cover one of those today, and that's the DuckDB Airflow provider. If you're not familiar, the easiest way to look at information on providers is the Astronomer registry. So that's registry.astronomer.io. If I come here and search for DuckDB, you'll see the provider pop up right here. This will give you information about the modules that are in it. The DuckDB provider is great. It's contributed by the Airflow community and contains a hook that makes it really easy to run your queries with DuckDB. So I'm going to show you today how you can use this. So let's go ahead and hop right over to the code. I'm going to start within an Airflow project here. You can see I've got an empty DAG file from DuckDB provider example. I've already got the DAG itself instantiated, but there's nothing in it currently. So we're going to go ahead and build this out. And the first thing that we're actually going to do is make sure that that DuckDB provider is installed in our Airflow project. So within an Astro CLI project like I'm running here, you can do that by adding the Airflow provider DuckDB to your requirements.txt file. If you're not running with the CLI, any way that you install Python packages or provider packages in your Airflow environment will work here, but you'll want to make sure to add that. It's a good idea to also pin the version just so you know what you're working with, and make sure that any changes don't mess up your workflows going forward. Once we have that installed, we're going to go ahead and import that into our DAG, like so. So we're going to import that DuckDB hook. Again, that's what we're going to use to run our queries with Airflow. Next step here is we're going to define a couple of variables that are going to be used in our DAG later. So the first is our connection ID. This is what's going to connect to our local DuckDB. In my case, again, I'm going to work with a local DuckDB instance. This will also work with MotherDuck, their cloud service. You would just have a slightly different connection. This is just the name I'm going to give it. We'll set this up in the Airflow UI in just a minute. Next thing I'm going to do is provide the table name. So this is what I'm going to query. A little easier to provide this up front. This table is called 3 random ducks. As you can imagine, it contains a couple of different ducks. They're provided by another DAG. Next, we instantiate our DAG. That's already done. So this is pretty standard within Airflow. And then we're going to go ahead and add a task. So we'll use the task flow API here. Again, with the DuckDB hook, this is easiest to implement in a Python task that you write. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in here. And actually, let's get the indentation right there. So again, this task is going to use that DuckDB hook to run a query on my local DuckDB instance. It's going to take that table that we're going to query in here as a parameter. We're then going to instantiate that hook with the connection ID that we provide. And then all we have to do is execute our query. So we're just going to select star from our table, which is that 3 random ducks. And then we're going to return the results. Finally, since this is task flow API, I need to actually call this task so that it gets run as part of my DAG. Oops. Like so. All right, and that's it. Super straightforward. Again, this is really helpful if you're with DuckDB. Now, if we hop over to the Airflow UI, again, I mentioned that we need to define a connection so that we can connect Airflow to DuckDB. That's pretty common with any database you use. I'm going to do that in the Airflow UI here, so you can go to Admin Connections. I've actually already set this up, but if we go ahead and take a look at it, if you're working with local DuckDB, again, this is super straightforward. We're just going to choose the same name that we put in that DAG file, choose the DuckDB connection type. And then for our path to our local database file, we're going to put include and then our DuckDB here. So again, if you're working with MotherDuck, their cloud service, your connection here will look a little different. We have details on how to set that up in that blog post. I'll link. Now, if we go back to our DAG, here's my DuckDB provider example. Again, it has just that one task that's going to query the local DuckDB. I'm going to go ahead and trigger this. We should see it run in just a second. And then if we look at the logs for this task, we can see that it printed out our 3 random duck breeds. That's awesome. Turns out there are a lot of different great ducks out there. So something cool to play around with as you also work with DuckDB. That's it. Super straightforward. Again, we will throw a link in the chat to these other resources, but we hope that you use this to get started with your Airflow and DuckDB. Thanks, everybody.